Let's look at the corridor just for a second. Just in case you're not familiar how the corridor lies in relation to Interstate 85, which is a very important thing to understand. The shippers that we've talked to that want to come into the region and locate here in Gaston County, this is one of the things that they see as the most valuable pieces of the puzzle, is the fact that they have immediate access because of the parallel nature with this railway and Interstate 85 and the quick access to 485, 77, potentially the Garden Parkway, and 321. So this, from a distribution network standpoint, this railroad works very well. Now, it's not that long. We've only got about 14.6 track miles here in Gaston County. But the great advantage, the tremendous advantage that we have is, of course, the original part of the line continued on to Charlotte from Mount Holly, and that portion of the line is presently operated by CSX. And on the southern end of the line, geographically west in Gastonia, we have the connection to Norfolk Southern. So therein lies why I have my two friends here from CSX and Norfolk Southern, because we are the portal by which the traffic enters their networks and comes from their networks to customers here in Gaston County. Freight service is the key. Freight service is what produces the revenue that pays the bills. It's part of the supply chain. And especially if you think going back to a situation of $4 plus gasoline, I had customers coming to me that were scared to death because they had companies that were located in some place that did not have rail access. And they were very concerned because they could not be competitive in a marketplace where their competition did have rail access. So clearly, fuel pricing tends to drive customers back towards a rail situation, especially being that this rail network is located in an ideal distribution corridor. Also, it provides the shipping alternative that other than trucking. And with the available plant sites, unutilized, underutilized, or unused sites, plus an available and skilled workforce, and the connectivity to the two Class 1 railroads, I couldn't have picked a better location for a railroad to be located. And when you think about the Class 1 networks and their ability to deliver nationwide, and we can send that traffic out or bring supplies in from that network, it really is a symbiotic relationship between us and the Class 1 carriers. Now, here's what's going on as far as the reactivation of the line. In January of 2008, the process was completed and we were selected through the request for proposal process. There was a competitive bid process that went out to the Class 3 carriers, the short lines, within the state of North Carolina as well as nationwide. There are only two respondents to that request, my company and a company from down in Alabama or Georgia. That was rejected, their offer was rejected because they were felt to be unsuitable for the service. So since that point in time, of course, the state said, you have to have at least 100 carloads per mile of track. That's the standard that's required to put a state-owned railroad back in service. So that would equate to about 1,500 cars. So my mission is, of course, has been out there beating the bushes trying to find customers. Now, part of getting a customer base is one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is to make sure that we can hand that traffic off or bring the traffic in from our Class 1 connections. And so we're in the process. We already have an interchange agreement negotiated with Norfolk Southern. We're in discussions with CSX about finalizing that interchange agreement. The lease is quite honestly one of my frustrations. We met in February last year, as was our first lease discussion. I still do not have a lease from the state. I hope to have that situation rectified fairly soon. The NCDOT would rehabilitate the line. We will lease the line, and pay fees for leasing that line. We would hope that those fees will go back into the infrastructure as opposed to going to some other place within the Carolinas. We want the money to stay locally to improve the rail infrastructure here in Gaston County to make sure that we can expand our customer base on the line. We are thankful that we had tremendous support from the legislative body here in the state, with the both state level as well as local level, for the support that the line has received. And thank you to Senator Hoyle and to the county commissioners for your assistance with the process and recognizing how important this is to the county to have a healthy line through the county. It is anticipated right now, based on the projected timeline that we have from the state rail division, that rail service will begin September of this year. The rehabilitation, the line is actually in almost passable condition right now. There are some segments that would have to do work. We could pretty much run a locomotive across it right now, with some exceptions. The rehabilitation should begin in July of 2009. Just this week, the NCDOT Rail Division folks were in. The division engineer, as well as the corridor manager, were in town. They were doing an environmental assessment. They're well, almost complete with the environmental assessment on the line. And all the data so far is coming back. It's very positive. So there's no issues. There's no showstoppers in that regard. The timeline again shows that the PNN will be active for service by September 1 of this year. Now, when we talk about, I know there's been some wild stories. We know that there was a community that was not happy that the railroad was going to be in service, even though the railroad's been there since 1911, 1912. And there were some wild stories that we were going to run trains past their homes at 60 mile an hour and 100-car trains. And I want to be very clear about this. We will not be running 100-car trains, and unless we do commuter rail, we certainly won't be doing 60 mile an hour. Now, when you look at the Federal Railroad Administration, which is a regulatory body that controls our industry and has oversight, they have a track class system that dictates the speeds that are authorized. Now, we certainly won't be running a Class 9 track. I can assure you that we will not be doing 200 miles an hour. So let's look at what we will be doing. The track will be rehabilitated to a Class 3 track condition, which, if we chose, we could operate a freight train at 40 mile an hour speed and a passenger train at 60 mile an hour speed. We cannot have it in accepted track condition. Now, segments of the Belmont branch, for example, right now, are what would be considered accepted track. That would prohibit the ability to run passenger service, and it would also prohibit the ability to put more than 5 hazardous material cars. Now, we don't intend to run hazardous materials, let me emphasize that to you. However, as a common carrier, we have an obligation, and that's a sticking point with all of us, all the railroad industry, is that we're forced to take things like chlorine and those things that would be considered toxic, inhalant hazard, and hazardous materials. And but we have no customers that have expressed an interest in those kind of cars, so that's not really an issue for us right now. We will expect to operate the railroad probably in a Class 2 condition. So the maximum speed that we would intend to operate a freight train would be a 25 mile an hour. Now, the reality is, if you were running end-to-end and didn't stop and pick up a customer's car, you might be able to do 25 mile an hour. But more than likely, it's going to be closer to the Class 1 condition, 10 mile an hour operations, 10 to 15 mile an hour operations, because of the nature of our business, stopping, picking up cars, dropping off cars to the customers.